Have you ever tried to build a business between flare-ups? To climb the career ladder while your body is begging you to lie down? What does success look like when your ambition has to coexist with chronic illness? Welcome to Chronic Boss Unfiltered, the podcast where ambition meets women's health. I'm Lilly Stairs, and I've built 2 businesses while managing 3 autoimmune conditions. Each week, I sit down with powerhouse women, entrepreneurs, leaders, and changemakers who are building the career of their dreams while navigating chronic conditions. Together, we'll help you dream big while prioritizing your health. No filters, no fluff, just raw stories from the hospital bed to the boardroom. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome. Today we are joined by Tiffany Yu, a trailblazing entrepreneur, author, and advocate. Tiffany is the founder and CEO of Diversability, a disability-owned community business with tens of thousands of members around the world. It's built to elevate disability pride, leadership, and inclusion. She's the author of the Anti-Ablest Manifesto and a 3-time TEDx speaker whose work has reached millions. Tiffany has spent her career challenging the way that we think about disability. She's redefining inclusion not as a checkbox, but as a movement rooted in power, pride, and community. I am so delighted that we have you here today, Tiffany. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Tiffany, before we dive into your work today, I'd love to start at the beginning. Can you share a little bit of your story with us and what led you to this work that you're doing now and how your personal journey has shaped that?
I come into this space based off of my own lived experience. So at the age of 9, I was involved in a car accident where my dad was driving, unfortunately passed away. And I acquired a handful of injuries and disabilities, including permanently paralyzing one of my arms. I broke a couple bones in one of my legs, so I was a temporary wheelchair user for about 4 months. And much later, I'd be diagnosed with PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a type of neurodivergence or mental health disability. And for the first decade plus after I became disabled, I actually think perhaps heavily influenced by being the daughter of Asian immigrants, I had internalized that I really shouldn't share any of those details with anyone. And so I would wear long sleeves all the time to try to hide my arm. And I would tell people that my dad was away on a trip. I learned that death in the immediate family meant that your family was bad luck or something. And I want to say I probably have spent the past 15 plus years working to unlearn that and realize what it means to exist in my disabled body and be proud of myself. And how can we also encourage and empower other people to find that too?
Thank you, Tiffany. And for those of you who are watching on video, my lovely cat Winston has decided that he wanted to pop in and hear Tiffany's story.
I will say that I dream of becoming a cat whisperer. So I think he heard me.
Yes, you are. You know, the cats have never made an appearance on the podcast. So, Tiffany, perhaps you are a cat whisperer because he was clearly very drawn to you. So,
thank you. I'm going to clip that and I'm going to share it. So people make a joke that I'm like too thirsty for cats because cats are very independent. So we are digressing off script, but I just want people, Lilly said it, is that the cat did make an appearance.
It is true. And he truly has not on any of the other episodes. So, you know, I feel like we've taken the audience on emotional whiplash here. From your very deep story, personal story to you being thirsty for cats. But I guess that shows the range you've got, Tiffany, and I love it. I'm here for it. So anyways, you went through so much at such a young age, and I am blown away by the way that you're able to talk about all of these different elements of your story and you're able to piece them together to help others. And so when I was doing research for this podcast, I was totally digging into your TikTok and Instagram and your book and other podcast episodes that you've been on. And I wanted to bring up something on your TikTok intro story. It's pinned to the top of your profile, and it just absolutely stopped me in my tracks. I have thought about it a lot over the past couple of weeks. You mentioned that when you were growing up, there were conversations about the Japanese proverb, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. What does that proverb mean to you personally, and how has your relationship to it evolved?
Nail that sticks out gets hammered down is this idea that if you try to stand out, you're going to get hammered. And so the way that kind of played out for me was blend in with the wallpaper, be vanilla, uninteresting, and don't draw any attention to yourself. And I saw that reflected a little bit in my parents' journey, where I think for them being immigrants to the US, they had internalized that their pathway to success was through assimilation and erasure of their race. And I share that because it actually wasn't until I was 18 years old that I started to identify as Asian American or Taiwanese American. I didn't grow up speaking the language. I didn't understand the significance of Lunar New Year. I was an only. I was a nail that stuck out. And I want to share that 18-year-old of coming into my identity as an Asian person because I had a very similar journey with owning my disability identity too. And I wanted to share that other part that for me coming into a disability identity, I had a pathway for what that looked like in another aspect of my identity. So people always say one day you were not talking about it and the next day you were, how does that transition happen? And I think it was because I saw examples of finding community, meeting other Taiwanese American students when I was in university. And actually my takeaway now from that proverb, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down, is that all of us in community together as nails that stick out is how we thrive. We don't have the privilege to get, people will try to hammer us down, but we're still going to continue to stick out, right? And so how do we find community and solace in that in some ways? And I think now as an almost 40-year-old, I am realizing that the greatest gift is just by being myself. And the ways that I feel like I've been supported in that feels so liberating. I wish I could give 9-year-old Tiffany a hug.
Ugh. I love that, Tiffany. And again, I'm so grateful that you introduced that proverb to me because it challenged me to think really critically about identity. And I love how you stepped into owning these different parts of your identity that make you quote unquote different, but also the point that when everybody comes together, when you are in community and you're all sticking out together, we're a lot harder to hammer down, right? We become our own foundation, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing more about that. So that's your background. That's your baseline. And from there, these experiences that have shaped you and the different intersecting identities have inspired you to start businesses and write books and build communities. And I want to talk specifically about your company, Diversability, which actually started back in 2009 as a student club at Georgetown University. And so I would love to know, what were some of the key inflection points that took Diversability from student club to this thriving global organization?
2009, last year we turned 15 and I spent a lot of time, thank you. I spent a lot of time kind of thinking about our origins because it was really hard in 2009. People didn't understand what disability pride meant. They didn't understand that a disabled person could be proud. And it was really hard to get people to join. And fast forward, I love this question around the inflection points because it's not about the formation that happened in 2009. It was the transition from 2009 until where we are today. The first thing that happened was in 2014, all the students that I had met when I was a senior and they were a freshman had now graduated. So there was no leadership transition at Diversability at Georgetown. And to be totally transparent, I was a little sad. And, I've been thinking a lot about legacy. When I was in high school, I started a singing competition. My high school is called Walt Whitman High School. And I started a singing competition called Whitman Idol, modeled after American Idol, that now, 20 years later, is still happening. And no one knows that I started it. Unless I go back and I remind people. Talk about legacy, right? And then here I was at Georgetown. I started this thing, and 2014, no leadership transition. And there was nothing I could do because I'm not a student anymore. And I said, you know what? Maybe it served its time. And I'm a real big fan. And as I transitioned from university to becoming a young adult, I did notice some friendships also transitioned or changed. And I had a lot of grief around that. And something that I took away from that transition that I translated over to Diversability is I honor and I'm so proud of the time and the friendship that we did have together, even though it has shifted and transitioned into something else or is no longer. Wow. So that's how I felt about Diversability in 2014. And all of a sudden, at the end of 2014, through no pushing of my own, I got 2 messages that were independent of each other. One was a tweet that said, hey, what's going on with Diversability? Know some people you should meet. Because I think maybe I had Diversability in my Twitter bio. And then the next was an email that I had gotten from someone who came across some of the news articles from my university school paper that I was in. And this person had shared their disability story with me. And they were also Asian, so had some other shared identities as well. And at the end, they said something like, I really hope that I can share my story one day, but I'm not sure when I'll be ready yet, or something like that. This was end of 2014. I kind of felt like those felt like gentle nudges from the universe that maybe there was still something here. You know, the imagery I'm having right now is like when you have like a fire and you've put it out and it's like still crispy. I don't know what the right terminology is. So that like if it gets some spark, yeah, the embers. So they're still warm. There's something that might be there. At the beginning of 2015, I got introduced to this wonderful women's group, which maybe you should join. It's called Dreamers and Doers. And I got together with some of them and I said, you know what? I got these messages at the end of 2014. I'm not sure like what to do with it. And I'm the type of person I get like way too caught up in logistics. I'm like, is this a nonprofit with chapters? What about the Georgetown thing? And then one of my friends was like, Tiffany, why don't you just host one event? And if people show up, maybe you're onto something. We're not even incorporated now. We're kind of just like a meetup for disabled people. So we host that first event. It was April of 2015. And the fascinating thing about Tiffany in April of 2015 is I had no disability community. I had the 2009 group. And then at this particular point in time, I was working in the corporate world and I was part of their disability employee resource group. So yes, within my companies maybe, but not a broader, not probably the community that you and I both have. I mean, I don't know how much detail, so let me think of the highlights. So 2015, we launched that first event. It was sold out, which was like 70 people, as many people we could fit into like the common area of a co-working space. And after that event, people came up to us and they go, oh, when's the next event? And it made me realize, at least at that particular point in time in 2015, that there was no like meetup for disabled people. Now I think there are tons of events. And this was in New York City. So 2015, we still continue to host those events. And then we started to launch chapters. So the person who had sent me the email, he was based in Los Angeles. So he launched the Los Angeles chapter and they had their event. Montgomery, Alabama, DC were all bubbling with events too. Portland, Oregon. And then the pandemic happened in 2020. I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but I guess from 2015 until 2020, we pretty much operated on an events basis and we finally incorporated. And interestingly enough, the impetus for the incorporation was the New York Public Library, which had generously donated space for us to host some of our events, came to us and said, hey, we're looking to do a staff librarian awareness training. Can you curate people who have different types of disabilities to speak on this panel and we'll pay you? And I was like, oh, I didn't realize we could do that. And so I negotiated for them and we took like a small cut and we got 3 people who had very different experiences navigating the library on this panel. And I was like, did we accidentally come up with a business model? So fast forward to 2020, the start of the pandemic, and we were primarily doing events. I went on unemployment benefits, and prior to that time, Diversability kind of just paid for itself. We charged like $5 ticket fee for people to just cover our event costs. So how I paid myself was through like Airbnb out my apartment. If I was traveling to a conference, I'd use points or try to get a scholarship. And actually, this is something I do talk about a lot more recently, is what I call like creative entrepreneurship, where it's like, okay, maybe we haven't figured out the business model yet, but like maybe we can take a bunch of surveys. There's tons of research being done that are inviting like patient advocacy and patient research. So in 2020, we applied for and got into Meta's Community Accelerator program. At that particular point in time, we said, okay, we've previously just been mainly doing in-person events. What does the transition to virtual look like and how do we do it right? We had a kind of dormant Facebook group for people to kind of gather to chat in between our events, but it was really for me about like meeting in person, because I was like, when you meet someone, it challenges your stereotypes. It starts to interrupt that bias that you may have about what someone who lives with a disability and what their lives are like. So that kind of felt like our first big win on an organizational level, I want to say. And since then, we've had a couple other big wins. But I will say probably the biggest, and our team grew from 2 to 11. Now we're back down to 4. We grew very quickly, probably like a lot of other organizations have. And today I feel really proud. We run a paid membership community. We've spoken a little bit about that experience. But for me, it feels like the secret weapon for people in the disability community. Like, where's the place that you can go to lift each other up and share opportunities with each other so that we can increase the visibility and respect for all of us overall? And hey, it's okay if, you can't afford the membership. Can we have free opportunities for you to plug into community as well? But I feel like I built my whole brand around community because that's something I so desperately wanted as a kid. I felt so isolated and alone and excluded in my experience that it's like, and I ebb and flow because I'm an introvert too. And now even thinking about it, I don't even know if over the past like 5, 10, 15 years, those were the key visible moments. But I feel like a lot of it was probably a lot of confidence in myself and my story and the transformation that I believe can happen for so many of us in the disability community if you know that you're not alone.
Yeah, I loved hearing that story because it was 15 years is remarkable. And you built something, an industry that's kind of starting to exist, right? Like this disability advocacy as a business model. But that was not at all a thing back in 2009 when you first got this started. And so it's amazing to watch your ingenuity and hear your thinking process and what those inflection points were that brought you here, because you really were such a pioneer in this that paved the way for the rest of us to step into this space, right? I don't know that Chronic Boss would be here if it weren't for you paving the way with Diversability. So thank you for all of the incredible work that you do.
I appreciate that. I had a friend, she recently read my book, The Anti-Ablest Manifesto, and she's like, Tiffany, what's so interesting about you is that like you're doing the thing. And I never like thought about it that way, because if I look back, it was like, okay, I couldn't find community, so I created one. Okay, I couldn't find events that featured disabled speakers, so I started hosting and organizing them. Okay, I couldn't find grant opportunities for disabled people who had projects, so we co-founded it, through the Awesome Foundation Disability chapter. Then it's like, okay, we don't have an endowment fund that supports disabled students at Georgetown, which is such a pivotal playground advocacy moment for me. So then I started it, and it was like, I feel like many of us within the disability community do this too, right? So much of our work is inspired by not only injustice, but gaps that we're seeing. And I have this saying, like, I'm funding and building the things I wish existed when I was younger. But I appreciate you saying that. I think I don't want to be the only nail that sticks out. And I'm so grateful that not only are there like so many membership communities focused on disability leadership now too, but I think it's a lot easier to find community now than it was back in 2009.
Yeah, most certainly. Spaces where we're honoring the positive too. And you can have the space where you're wallowing a little bit in the challenges, or trying, maybe not, the wallowing's not the right word, but navigating the challenges that you face as a disabled person, but also being able to celebrate what makes you unique and what gifts you bring to the world, and how your disability or chronic condition, or whatever way you want to say it, actually fuels you and makes you better at what you do. And so that's a lot of what we talk about at Chronic Boss. And you brought up the Anti-Ablism Manifesto, which is where I was going next, and your TikTok series that has over 350 videos and over 5 million views, which I have in my notes in all caps. So cool, with a lot of exclamation points, because it's just incredible the reach that's gotten. So start there, because I believe the TikTok series came before the book. So tell me a little bit about how that all got started.
It was 2020. When I downloaded TikTok, probably like many of you. And I will say, and maybe still do, I don't like the sound of my voice. And so Instagram was where I thrived. I was like, static photos, Instagram, the old version of it. Then TikTok came along, and one of my friends, actually, she came on my podcast, Haley Hoffman Smith, and she goes, you got to get on TikTok. And I go, oh, well, it's lip syncing and music videos. She goes, it's so much more than that. And she got onto TikTok at a very pivotal time too. So many of us were experiencing enormous amounts of growth. And I thought, okay, this is a video platform. Like, what visual stuff do I have? And then with the self-consciousness around my voice, I'm like, the message matters more than me being a critic of myself. So I'm like, I'm going to say it however it needs to be said, in the tone of voice that I have. So I originally started recording videos of how I navigate life with a paralyzed arm. Surprisingly, and actually I just talked about this today, Tilt Beauty, the beauty brand, and their mascara. So I actually have a video, probably from 2020, showing how I open a tube of mascara, not the Tilt one, but most mascara is very thin and very sleek, And if you're opening it with one hand, it's quite difficult. So I would like do some balancing act where I have the tube in between my toes and then I twist it open. And now I'm like, maybe I should stitch it now with my Tilt Beauty mascara. So anyway, so I was showing people how I navigate the world with a paralyzed arm, which was not the type of advocacy. I was doing a different type of advocacy. And fascinatingly so, I found that content helped me find other people who live with paralyzed arms, and anyone who has an upper extremity related disability was finding a lot of benefits from it too. Stroke, people who were recovering from strokes, and even occupational therapists. So I was like, okay, this feels weird that I'm showing you how I open mascara, but maybe it will be helpful. And after a certain point in time, I was like, I don't know if I want to keep creating content like that. But one question I do keep getting is, how can I show up better for the disability community? And every single time I would do a podcast, at the end, they would always ask the question, okay, what's the one thing you hope people take away about how they can show up better for the disability community? And it bothered me because the answer is different depending on who you are. So for you, Lilly, as a podcast host, it could be around putting transcripts for your podcast, or someone who is creating content on social media, like captioning your videos. I'm not going to tell someone who's an HR manager to do that, So then I was like, you know what? And I got inspired by a friend who started the Anti-Racism Daily, which was a newsletter. And I said, that doesn't seem like my sphere of influence, but I can record a 15 to 30 second video every day. So I originally started the Anti-Ablism Daily. And then I was like, knowing me, I cannot sustain this on a daily basis. And so in December of 2020, I started part 1 of the Anti-Ablism, what is now known as the Anti-Ablism series. And you'll notice that in the first beginning parts, maybe the first 150 parts, it was all me. And we were diving into things like, what's the definition of disability? What's ableism? Did you know there are over 1 billion people who live with disabilities globally? Did you know the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, is turning 35? Did you know people who live with chronic illnesses is also considered a type of disability? If you live with a disability and you don't, we're going into, we could talk about the microaggressions part, we could talk about the data. And now it's more transition to having guests on and trying to use my platform to share with others. But the book came in about a couple months later, and I never anticipated writing a book. And it happened unconventionally in the sense that a literary agent, I think we're seeing a lot more social media creators now get book deals because I think the platform and the audience you have is sticky. So someone reached out and they said, hey, have you thought about writing a book? And I said, no, I have too much going on. And they said, I want to represent you for a book that you're going to write. And I said, okay, you have fun with that. And, maybe a year passes by. And I get reached out to by a publisher. And they said, hey, I've been seeing what you're posting on LinkedIn. Lilly, I see the stuff you're posting on LinkedIn too. People see, you don't know who's watching. And they say, oh, have you ever thought about writing a book about disability inclusion that is kind of like geared toward allies and can also resonate with like organizations and employers? And I was like, oh, interesting, to fund our work at Diversability, where I'm actually going and doing some workshops around disability inclusion in the workplace. So that kind of became the beginning of the book proposal, which is kind of like the business plan for your book. I don't know if you have aspirations to write a book. This is probably more information than you want.
No, it's great because we actually have a lot of people in our community who are maybe in the process of writing a book or are thinking about it. To your point, it is something that's becoming more commonplace where creators online are being asked to do it or interested in doing it. And I think it's an amazing way to connect with your audience and to get these important messages out. So I'm very intrigued, and I know that folks will be as well. So keep going. I mean, tell us what is in the book. So tell us what people can expect. And actually, a specific question for you too. I'm really curious why you went with the term manifesto as opposed to making it a biography or what have you. How did you end up there?
Yeah, eventually there may be a memoir. I've had a book title in my head, I think since I was a kid, of a book I want to write with that title. I have no idea why I like the title, but anyway, I'm not going to share it. I'm not going to share it just yet. Okay. We can share it off the recording.
Is it Thirsty for Cats?
Actually, and that's a great title too. Yeah, so onto your point around, now I'm like, actually Thirsty for Cats could be a good children's book and could teach you about consent. But anyway, okay, I digress. So the Anti-Ablest Manifesto, when something is called a manifesto, it makes you feel something, right? It's a directive. And I think about, probably as you do, the urgency of this work. And I've been disabled for 28 years. I've been active as an advocate for 16. And people ask me why I still continue to do this work. And I think about how I wish people could see us the way I see us. We are magical. We're a generative force. In your language, we're bosses if we want to be. And we're not quite there yet. I still feel like there's like this attitude and perception gap. So then I said, okay, if I write a book that's a manifesto, it needs to be action oriented and similar to the way that we titled that our company is called Diversability. It makes you feel something. It makes you get curious. You're like, what is that word that's not a word? And it's an invitation for conversation. And so that's why I chose a title that's a little bit charged. But in addition to that, and I introduced this at the end of the book, is the Anti-Ablest Manifesto art. And this piece of art is actually the book in art form. So every statement on here, which very much reads like a manifesto, like disability is not a bad word or a bad thing, diversify your feed, we're not your inspiration, nothing about us without us, like everything is directive. Like every statement on the manifesto art actually corresponds with the chapter in the book. So yeah, I think for me, it was a couple parts, which is my brand has always been about curiosity and an invitation to have a conversation, whether that's through the name of our business, Diversability, or the name of my book, the Anti-Ablest Manifesto, or even how loud it is, right? It's an orange cover. And orange, I actually learned is like the color of advocacy. I didn't realize that really? At the time. For me, it represented fire, and fire to me means action. And we had that metaphor of the embers and maybe it's all going back.
The same thing. It's fire. Yeah, you've got a fire in your soul to make an impact. I love, and you can see that and you can feel that in the way that you communicate, Tiffany. You really can.
But what I will say you can expect from the book is, to me, it was my attempt at, again, answering the question, how can all of us show up better for the disability community? And it takes you through this framework called Me, We, Us, which is this transformative framework that I learned about 10 years ago in social impact spaces about how we can create change. So I think oftentimes we want to jump right to the us. And us to me is policy change, showing up at City Hall, even running for office. But the thing is, we've had a law in place here in the US, the Americans with Disabilities Act, for 35 years, and yet we still have a huge unemployment gap. We're still twice as likely to live in poverty. We still have policies in place that keep many of us who are on disability benefits in poverty. It's still legal to pay disabled people below minimum wage. So it's like policy, yes, we need, but we also need the hearts and minds to catch up. So the me section and the we section of the book is like, here's the independent study I can do on my own work. Here's the work we can do in relationship with each other. Then how can we show up in full force with being all those nails that are hammered out in community with each other to make change on a broader societal level.
So cool. And the book is so powerful, and it is designed for people living with disabilities, as well as, to your point, people who are not and want to be anti-ableist, want to be allies, want to support and help drive the movement forward. You used a word when you were describing people living with disabilities and chronic conditions, and you used the word magical, that we are magical. And I believe that, and I say that often. And I know that members of our communities probably believe and see that, or we're helping them to believe and see that. But for anyone who's listening, who is living with a disability and they don't feel that yet, what is your advice to them? How can they believe in that magic in themselves?
I do wonder if there comes a point where I become unrelatable, where I become like so proud. And you know what it is? Every time I am with other disabled people, it feels like a family reunion. But it started with showing up on myself, right? And so, I mean, my short answer to this question is find community. And whether that's with Diversability or Chronic Boss or even a hashtag on social media, I do think, like, even if I think back to ableism as a system of oppression that devalues disabled bodies and our minds, part of how it gets its power is by making us think we have none. Part of how we think we have no power is by keeping us intentionally isolated and alone. So part of how I may be projecting that you are not feeling in this magical space just yet is that you haven't yet found your people. But what I will say is that, I guess I'll say two things. One is, I often get asked the question, what would I tell 9-year-old Tiffany? But if I could go back to her and tell her everything's going to be okay, you're going to be great, it's not going to land with her, right? And so I want to make space for the grief and the heaviness and the tough parts of existing in a disabled body, especially if your disability is debilitating. And also maybe sometimes the social attitudes and perceptions of having to advocate for yourself and your access needs. That can be exhausting. So how can we also make space for that softness when you have to show up so hard in other places too? And I love this quote, which is my second point. And when I heard this quote, I actually only heard it in 2020. It's from someone named Francis Weller. And he goes, "The work of the mature person is to carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and to be stretched large by them. How much sorrow can I hold? That's how much gratitude I can give." And I share that quote because for that 10-year period after I became disabled, I was not proud and I was not existing and seeing our community as magical. I had internalized society's low expectations of what I was to become. And I sat in grief for a really long time. I thought that was the only place I could exist. And I also want to share, and you touched on this a little bit too, Lily, is that I think sometimes people think there is only trauma from our stories. And sometimes we only get engagement when it's those hard, soft parts. And how can we live the fullness and colorfulness of our lives if we don't have light too? So I've been on this journey maybe over the last 5 years since I discovered that quote of really exploring what it means to sit in gratitude. I even remember 2016, I bought a sweatshirt that said "My heart is full." And one detail I did not share is that the car accident happened over Thanksgiving. So a holiday, which to me is supposed to be about gratitude, ended up being the thing that changed the entire trajectory of my life. And was very difficult and still is. The anniversary is still very tender to me. And so I've kind of just been on this journey, from buying that. I bought the sweatshirt in 2 colors too, but it was like, I don't know what this phrase means to me yet. What is that journey going to look like? Right. And so yeah, if you are the type of person who loves messages like that, like I feel like you love quotes, then maybe that will land. But yeah, I want to make space if you are feeling alone, that your people are out there. You just haven't found them yet. And I really hope that no matter who you are, if you are listening to this, you do have community, irrespective of whether it's with one of ours.
Yeah, so well said. And I am a big quote girly, so I love that quote and I've never heard it. I will be, you've given me a lot to chew on, Tiffany, with your Japanese
quotes.
proverb. And now this quote, I'm loving it. And we will make sure that there's, maybe we'll get that in the show notes so that people can really sit with that and digest it. Really wonderfully said. And you're right, community, you've got to meet. And maybe some people are going to connect with what you said. Some people connect with what I said. Maybe they connect with neither of us, but hopefully it encourages them to go find people that they do connect with. So I love that. I love that. Oh my gosh, so much here. I have so many more questions that I could ask you. I feel like I need a part 2 and 3 with Tiffany. But if I had to boil my questions down here, what's next for you in your work? You've done so much. Where are you headed? What are you most excited about?
We started this conversation. I'm seeing like so many themes kind of web through this conversation. This book feels like the ultimate legacy. It has been, I do have people coming to me saying, hey, you should write a version of this book for middle school students. You should write a version of this book for medical professionals. And I go, why don't you write that book? Because you are in that space. And maybe a middle schooler wouldn't write it, but I also reflect on how I'd only learned later in life that I could have been eligible for accommodations when I was going through school as a kid, but I didn't get them, right? So I don't know if I'm the best person to write about that for that audience. So the book is kind of taking on a life of its own, which has been really cool. Some of my favorite wins are I got feedback from a bookstore that said, we're so grateful that you hosted us and we recommend any other bookstore host you because it's showed us how to make our events so much better and our bookstore better for everyone in our community. And then she went on to tell me that she's paying for someone on her staff to take ASL classes to then teach some basic sign language to everyone so that again, we can communicate with readers who have all different disabilities. So what is currently getting me excited is I started rock climbing earlier this year. Not really like professionally. Part of this journey of like the gratitude is also rediscovering things that 9-year-old Tiffany loved doing. And I miraculously made the cutoff to get to represent USA at a couple of international competitions this year, and we just finished up our season. But climbing is my favorite way to reconnect with a pre-disabled 9-year-old Tiffany who went to rock climbing gyms at friends' birthday parties, and maybe I will have my next birthday party at the rock climbing gym. So I guess all of that to say, I think I'm just savoring that this book has continued on. As we're recording this, the book has already been out for over a year. We're currently on our 4th printing. We have sold out 4 of our book stops this year, which is cool because most people don't really continue to host them. But I'm just so grateful that it's continuing to resonate. And if my legacy in this space is that it empowered people within our community to find their voice or to start their own initiatives, then I feel complete.
I feel myself getting emotional because that is what this is all about. And you're right. This conversation, we've had the arc from Whitman Idol to Anti-Ablest Manifesto, and it has already touched in such a short period of time. It's already touched so many lives and changed so many lives. And you're changing a paradigm. You're changing the world, not just a paradigm, you're changing the world, which is really remarkable. So thank you for all that you're doing. And I also appreciate that when I asked you that question, you didn't just focus on what you're doing in work, but also what you're doing to light yourself up in these different parts of our lives and ourselves. And for so many of us, I know for so many of us in the chronic boss community, it's go, go, go pace. We're trying, but we're also trying to balance this ambition, but also our health and our lives and our relationships, and taking a moment to say, we can build a legacy and we can build our businesses and we can have that ambition while at the same time honoring the other parts of ourselves. And so I really love your answer. And I hope that that also inspires people to go find what lights the 9-year-old self in them up.
Yes. I will also share, I look at my itinerary for this week and I am going to play laser tag. And then I'm going to a film screening and like a shoe decorating event. And I'm like, shouldn't it? It should be fun. And I will say that's actually part of why I moved to LA is rest and sustainability and what I call PFJ, play, fun, joy, is what we need in this work. I can tell you about the heaviness of the world we are existing in right now and how hard things are for the disability community. And I do not want to erase that. And I also know that part of how I'm going to sustain in this work is making sure that I am well rested and have time to play.
Beautifully said, Tiffany. I have one final question for you. I would love to know, when you think about the word chronic boss, what does it mean to you?
I mean, honestly, I just see your picture there. That's some good branding right now. The chronic boss, I think what comes up is being a boss on your own terms, and the longer version, that you always get the longer version.
I love the longer version.
Notice that my definition of success, which I'm going to be a tangent to boss, my version of success changed over the last period of time. And I feel like initially I was making decisions that I thought would look externally good. Like my worth was based on other people's judgments of me. And now my definition of success, or even being a chronic boss, is when I look in the mirror, do I like what I see? Do I like how I'm showing up in the world? Am I showing up with integrity in myself? Even with the book, I wrote the best book that I could write for me. I know that there are parts of it that could be better, which is why like the people who are recommending versions of this book or adjustments to it, I'm like, oh, I actually think you're the best person to do that, right? You have more specialized knowledge in that space. So yeah, I think it's just living life on your own terms and being unapologetic about it. And liking yourself, loving yourself.
Tiffany, author, advocate, cat whisperer, Whitman Idol starter, anti-ableist, legacy leader. I mean, you are just... This conversation totally filled my cup. You are a rock star and you are a trailblazer. And thank you for being here today. And thank you for starting this movement 15 years ago. We wouldn't be here without you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a wrap on this episode of Chronic Boss Unfiltered. But there are so many other ways we can stay connected. Head to chronicboss.com to access free resources, explore our membership, and join the community. You'll find all the links you need in the episode notes below. If this episode spoke to you, send it to a friend who gets it. Leave us a review or hit that follow button so you never miss a moment. Thank you for spending this time with us. Cheers to you, your health, and your wealth. See you next time.